Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at Ironhack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we are back with an, all-time repeater here. Andrzej Marczewski is coming back to Professor Game for many reasons. We'll get into that in a second. But Andrzej, before we start, are you prepared once again to engage?
I am indeed.
Let's do this. And Andrzej is back, definitely. We've had one of the first episodes was with Andrzej. We had an episode discussing gamification and ethics. That was a very interesting episode. I've mentioned it in my classes as well, and people start wondering about, the dark side of what can be done with gamification too. So I point them to that episode as well. But now, Andrzej has been through many stages, many different times in his life, in professional life and gamification life especially. And recently, well, not so recently anymore, right? You're changing jobs and going back to having gamification as a bit more of a hobby. That's not so recent anymore, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think gamification's back to being a passion for the time being. I think I'm happy doing what I'm doing, and I'm happy giving gamification a slightly more abstract view again, which is what I used to do a lot of. So it's good fun at the minute. Really enjoying myself.
So Andrzej, if I'm recalling correctly, I'm not going to say years because I'm not going to remember years for sure. But from being, a fantastic guy talking about gamification, and as he just mentioned, in the abstract sense in many ways, because his, sort of main role was dedicated to other things, somewhat related at some point. But then he started sort of taking the path of actually going explicitly for gamification or gamification-like roles. And he did that for a while, of course, definitely gained some new and interesting insights, but is now back to as we just talked, to being passionate about the more abstract role in that sense and being able to dedicate. Because I think there was something interesting that you once mentioned. I'm not sure if this was something in one of your posts or if I heard you say it in a conference or just chatting around, that you were saying, like, when you're full-time into gamification, the thing that ends up happening is that the passion side of having your blog and maintaining and talking about gamification as well outside of work kind of suffers a little bit. And that's something that happens for a bit, right?
Yeah, I think it's like all these things. I've got friends who work in the games industry and as debuggers, so they'll sit and play the same level of a game over and over again, hundreds of times. And you initially think, oh man, I mean, they're like beta testers; they get to play the games early and all that kind of stuff. That must be amazing fun. And when you actually talk to them, they sound miserable because they have literally just played the same level over and over and over and over and over again. And they kind of look at it and go, yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's okay, but it's not like playing games anymore. It's kind of that joy that came from playing the game is slightly askew because now they're having to actually write down what's going wrong, what they're doing. Every aspect of the game has changed a bit for them. So I think for me, it's nice to be able to sit back from that world a little bit and kind of look at it at a slightly more holistic level. When you're in the middle of it, when you're in the trenches, you get very focused on the real practicalities of it, which is great, but you start to lose some of the bit that I was much more interested in, which is a lot more around kind of almost the philosophy of what was going on and how that fitted with practicalities of it. So it's an interesting way that I'm now having to view things a little bit, because I've done that kind of real focused day-to-day stuff. And then I can now look back at it and go, right, now that plus the other experience I've had equals this.
It's an entirely new perspective for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So taking it from that perspective, I would like to ask you, like, I'm very curious. Actually, no, let me take a step back before that, because you mentioned something, about QA testing. And I've mentioned this a couple of times in conferences, and I've mentioned it here as well, that one of my childhood dreams was actually working for, what was then and I think it still exists, the Nintendo magazine. Because what I viewed from that work was, you're playing games all day, not doing QA. I have to admit, that was not necessarily my dream as a child. I didn't even know what that meant. But, you're playing that game all day, and then you get to sit down and write down about all that fun you had playing with the game. So
it's a child's view of the world, yeah. So I don't know if I spoke about this. I used to review games. So I used to run a website that was dedicated to reviewing video games. And I played hundreds of games, across. I started in 2006, and I genuinely got to a point where I hated playing games because they were just all the same. You'd play Call of Duty, and you'd be on like the 80 millionth version of Call of Duty, and it'd just be the same game as the previous version. It just felt like you were just doing the same thing over and over again. So
don't tell this to the FIFA fans, right?
Well, FIFA, just reskin it and sell it again, for twice the price. So sometimes when the thing that you love becomes your job, I know they always say, you don't have a job, do the thing you love. The problem is when you start doing the thing you love and that is how you make your money, it becomes a lot more serious. And you have to be very careful about what you do and what you say and how you say it and how you approach things, because it's your livelihood. And I think, and that's great. And I loved doing it, and I will probably do it again in the future. But it's nice to be able to step back from it and go, right, okay, I'm now, 10 years into being in gamification, 11 years.
Yeah.
And I've worked in it, I've not worked in it, and it's quite nice to be able to step back and go, right, let's have a look at how things are now, actually look at it from an outsider's perspective almost, and how the industry's grown or not grown or whatever. So I think having that thing I love being back to being a hobby for a little bit, it's a nice reset button for me.
Yeah, I'm sure. Again, as you were mentioning, if you get back into a season of your life where you're back into, again, sort of full-time working for something related to gamification, or straight off as a gamification consultant, designer, whatever you want to go for, you'll have a new perspective. Go in, all in, do the thing, and once again, sort of reflect back, see how the industry has changed, maybe how your views might have changed as well. Because sometimes, you're on the outside and you say some things because, I'm not saying you do this, but it tends to be easier if you're on the outside to say, oh, these people are doing this. Then when you realize you might be doing that exact same thing, it's like, interesting. So I had, the right incentives were in place maybe for me to be doing that. Why didn't I sort of revert to the previous stage? And again, I'm not saying you did it, but I think it's a thing that is easy to, I don't even want to say fall into. It's just a thing that can happen as well.
Yeah, I think the thing with it is that you have to achieve certain things. So we always talk about gamification needing to achieve a goal. There has to be a reason to include gamification. And I think and there's a very idealistic view of it. So you look at it and go, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. It should be, you need to use intrinsic motivation, and you need to do this, and you shouldn't use rewards, and blah, blah, blah. And that's great until you're in front of a client who goes, I want a leaderboard. And you're like, well, you don't need a leaderboard. No, but we're going to have a leaderboard. You think, well, no, but that's going to defeat the object of what we're actually trying to achieve here. And I think that's where you start to realize that the real world, not for everybody. I mean, there are certain consultants who are in a position where they're working with customers that aren't like that. There are certain consultants who are in a position where, I've been in this position in the past where you can't just say no to stuff and turn around and say, no, I'm not doing that. And then you're sometimes in a position where you really don't want to upset the client. So you just kind of go, no, absolutely, you need a leaderboard. No worries at all. We'll create the best leaderboard that ever existed, And it's not being sort of deceitful. You're not lying to anybody. What you're doing is you are trying to achieve the goals of the customer, as well as then trying to fit the goals of the individuals who are going to be going through the experience. And there's a different mindset you have to approach when you're in that business front end of things a little bit, where there needs to be more of a compromise. And I think at an academic level, you kind of sit there and go, I'm not calling myself academic, but with the sort of stuff I was doing, you go, nope, this is wrong. You don't do this, blah, blah, blah. And then you sort of sit in the meeting with everybody and you go, yeah, okay, fine, get it. Let's do that, because this conversation can't end if we don't agree to something. So yeah, you've got to please everyone. And I don't have to do that at the moment. I can just please myself, which is quite nice. And I think there's a nice freedom to being able to say what you want about the industry. And not that I don't care, because I feel parental towards the industry. You know, I've been in it a while. I like to think I've contributed to the industry, and I like to feel that I've helped shape certain areas of it, which is a little bit arrogant, but it's the impression that I get when I see people talking about my work, and you go, oh, wow, that's something I did. So I do feel parental, and I feel that kind of protective. I feel protective of it. But in the same way as a parent does sometimes just stop their child and go, you're being dumb here, kid. You know, it's kind of, you sometimes have to stop them and give them a reality check. And I think that's kind of where I feel I am now with the industry, is that kind of stepping back and going, shall we actually start really growing up about this now? And start thinking about what we're going to be when we grow up, because we're 10 now, and soon we're going to be getting a job after we've got our GCSEs and A-levels. And by the time we're kind of 18, we're going to really need to know a little bit about how we're going to earn our livings. And I think that's where I'm at now. I've got a petulant 10 or 11-year-old that just needs to be reined back in again. I know I can't do it by myself, or I probably can't even affect it, but that's kind of how I feel about it. And so being able to step back and have that view rather than being in the middle of it, almost being the child, is quite nice. A really, really weird analogy there, but I think you know what I mean. It's that I see myself as God.
So at some point, I was thinking about, I was definitely listening, but I was thinking, like, I'm going to stop him at some point and say, come on, Andrzej, stop being so humble. Yes, you've had a big influence in the industry. And then, you started getting the parent analogy, and I said, well, if I say that, it's actually, I'm going to be the weird guy saying this. So, I'm not entirely sure how to approach that one, because there's no need to sort of humble it out and say, oh no, yeah, I really feel I've just done a little bit of my part. Because you've been, the gamification character of the year. I don't remember what that was in 2016. I think when you came to Madrid. Yeah. Which was fantastic. Your framework, I use it in my classes all the time. Like literally your framework of the hexagon and the user types, I use it all the time in my classes, because I think it's, it makes a lot of sense. And, just to park that idea there. So there are many things that you've done there. You have been, like, I've seen you, especially when you sort of try to move forward the group now and a few years ago as well, the gamification hub. You try to sort of pinpoint, these discussions and put, some, in Spanish, we say put the dot on top of the I, like, sort of making things that are in the right place.
Dot the I's and cross the T's.
Exactly. There was an English expression. I knew it. Dot the I's and cross the T's. That's it. Yeah, I'm not so great, because as you know, this is my second language, so I didn't live the daily life.
You speak it much better than I do. Don't worry.
I didn't live the daily life, so the daily expressions escape me pretty often. So I do feel that there is a big argument to say that you've been, in many ways, kind of a parent of the industry. But then, as you were saying as well, you were kind of the kid as well for a while, in many ways, because you were there, you were doing things, and you were saying, you kind of revealed that you were saying yes to leaderboards, Andrzej. I'm not sure if you want this recorded.
No. So as part of this evolution of my personality, I've also realized that I was probably a bit of an about certain things, and also probably wrong about quite a lot of things as well. And I think one of the things that I really I had to catch myself doing was, and I said this on the last podcast with you, I think, I never used to talk about fun. Fun wasn't a thing that got mentioned when you heard me talk about gamification. And the reason was, fun's very abstract, and it was really hard to define, and blah, blah, blah. And I made up all these excuses. And it was really because I was trying to sound clever and boring. I think, if I'm being honest, if I'm being truly honest to myself, I was trying to sound academic. And I just realized that, that there's no need. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think the industry should be a joke. And I think there is a level where sometimes what we do can be interpreted as not taking the business of it seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that's dangerous. And I think that's, when the parent hat comes on, it's like, pull yourself together. You're not a child. Let's try and be grown up about what we're doing. But I think I was taking that too far. I think I took that to the point where I was probably crippling some of my own creativity because I was trying so hard not to do certain things that I also wasn't making anything fun or enjoyable. And I wasn't enjoying it myself at times because I was kind of going, oh no, that doesn't sound serious enough. And so I was kind of, I'd gone too far the other way. And I think
you were the Lego dad of the Lego movie.
Yeah. You know, they weren't
Sticking
allowed
the Lego
to,
figures with glue and all that.
Yeah, no, the Craggle. I was the Craggle of gamification for a long time. Jesus, there's a thought. I was the Craggle of gamification. And I think I swung too far the other way. And the reason I swung too far the other way was because I was trying so hard to have the industry as a whole in a position where it was being taken seriously. And I think, you know, personally, I mean, Christ, I'm sounding like I'm taking responsibility for the whole industry here. That's not what I'm trying to do. I think what it is, it's more about when you start doing that, you lose sight of some of the things you were actually trying to achieve in the first place. And I think I got to that stage with my writing, with how I was approaching it on talks and talking to other people it was like, no, this is serious. You can't have fun. The flip side of that is I'm also finding that people are still going so far into the let's make this fun that it's just kind of it's impossible for anyone to take the industry seriously in that respect. So it's a really odd balancing point. But yeah, I just found I was becoming a bit of a dick about the whole thing.
you were mentioning that, and a thought came into my mind like very, very quickly, and I'm not sure if it makes entirely sense. But one of the things, and again, I know there's people doing fantastic work on escape rooms, and I respect that very much. But something that tends to happen, and again, I'm not talking anybody specific. I'm talking in general. Some people who get into the escape rooms. It's like you do the escape room and you do a super fun experience. Don't get me wrong. They're doing a great job in that sense. But then it's like, how do we sort of justify that this is actually reaching, for example, learning objectives by having this? You know, and I mentioned the escape rooms because I think the tendency here is a lot easier to get into that and then justify and say, oh yeah, you know, we had an escape room. You do that in teams. So that was, you know, we were training in teamwork. It's like, yeah, watch out. Like maybe you you designed for it, or maybe, you know, accidentally you ran into it. But it doesn't mean that because people were working in a team inside an escape room, you know, you were doing teamwork. That's like my bottom line there.
Yeah, was that the designed goal of that?
Exactly.
Of what you were doing? Or was that
when
nice,
you set out to do
coincidence?
it? Yeah, when you set out to do it, were you thinking like, this is what I want to reach? And alongside it, you might be thinking it has to be an awesome and super fun escape room. Fantastic. And I'm going into escape rooms, but this applies to many, if not everything else that is being done in gamification. Is the design intent and your goals are very clear at the top of your mind every time you're making design decisions? And whether every now and then you add something just for the fun to keep people engaged and so on, that's still okay. Or that's actually very much okay. But don't lose sight of where it is you're actually trying to get to. And I think it's very valid to get into that and maybe, again, as you were saying, swing a bit too much every now and then, because it's easy to fall, very, very easy to fall in the other direction, especially because of the industry that we're coming from, you know, games and game design typically are games that do not have a purpose. And the purpose is entertainment in itself. So, you know, you have to swing a little bit on the other direction to make sure it's actually happening to have a purpose and that the purpose is kept in mind, right?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right, and it's and as you say, we know particular couple of people who do escape rooms who are amazing at it, and whenever you see what they're doing, I'm just like, I want to work for you guys. You just look like having Michael, for instance. You know, his stuff looks fantastic, and he's always got an objective in mind for what he's doing. Nothing's there by accident. It's all designed specifically to achieve a certain goal. And then you look at other stuff and you think, no, that was just fun, wasn't it? You enjoyed doing that because you were making a game. And we've all done it. You know, I've built things that were games just because they were fun, and that's fine if even that bit of fun serves a purpose within the overall design. So, you know, one of the projects I worked on previously, you know, I built games that were just there to be games. There was part of an overall learning environment, and they were doing things that weren't related directly to just fun. And then at a certain point, they'll just play a game for fun because it was fun. It didn't serve any purpose other than a little bit of a refresher. It just kind of relaxed them, reset their brain a little bit, and then they could get back on with the learning. And I think
that is the objective in itself. Having a refresher so you can go back to it. That is an objective as well.
Yeah, exactly. But it was there for a reason. It wasn't just there by accident. And I think that's where, as you say, I think sometimes you kind of lose sight of why have you done this? What was the purpose of doing this? And that's lovely because I can sit back and say that now, which I know because I'm looking at it from a slightly different perspective now. Like I said, I think I got to a point where, and this has got nothing to do with career or work, I think I just got to a point where I had disappeared up my own backside, as we'd say in the UK, where I was almost in this little bubble of what I say is right. No one else can be right. And I think I just got to a point, I don't know how or why, I think there was a level of arrogance to it that crept in for a short period. And I thought, no, do you know what, actually, let's have a bit of a word with ourselves, take yourself to one side, have a little natter, and start again a bit. So I think the opportunity came for me to be able to do that again. I can kind of now reset it and kind of redress the balance a little bit and kind of bring myself back into check a little bit, which is quite nice.
That's very nice. And in fact, like I'm very curious about, one of the things that you mentioned when you were sort of your big comeback, as we could definitely call it, is you said, I'm going to be back to writing. I'm going to be publishing more often, which I've seen is actually been the case.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I'm still. I mean, my role at the moment is incredibly busy, and so by the time I get to the end of my day, as you would have the same problem, you get to the end of the day, and there's only so many hours you've got left to deal with kids. I'm in a band, so I practice guitar a lot, and there are other things that I want to do that aren't related to writing. But I don't think it's even getting back to writing more. I think it's writing better. That's what I'm going to aim for, is because I was really prolific for a number of years. I was writing 2 or 3 times a week, hundreds of posts. And of those hundreds of posts, probably 1 or 2 were of value. Every now and then, we all hit gold by mistake. I hit a few home runs, which people liked, and that's lovely. And I'm eternally grateful for the love that a lot of that stuff's had. But that was the minority. It's like good video games. The good video games are the minority. So I think I definitely missed more than I hit with a lot of the writing. And I think I want to go back to being able to take my time and think about what I'm going to write and approach subjects that I think either I've not approached before or I've approached badly in the past. Where I've kind of I've kind of hit people over the head with my opinion rather than being balanced about certain things. So I think it's sort of a comeback. I think it feels a bit like a comeback. It's nice.
So that actually answers exactly what I was aiming at. Like, what is it that you're aiming for in this new season? I heard that somebody used the word seasons in life, and now I'm using it everywhere.
I like that. Yeah. So oh dear me, what would this be now? Christ, season 7 or 8 by now. I just want to have fun again. I think I want to enjoy it. I want to get back into speaking again, schedule permitting. I will mention that I'm doing some work with Roman Rackwitz at the moment, which is going to be fun. I'm thinking about writing another book.
Nice.
I'm thinking about writing another book.
The thinking is already an advanced process,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny. Ninja Monkeys has been very popular, and I'm not going to lie, I've sold a good number of copies of the book. It's really proud of it. But it was in that period of time when I wrote it was kind of, I've told you the story before. The name of the book was a direct response to not being allowed to publish something in a scientific paper unless it was in a book. So I wrote it so that I can see even Ninja Monkeys like to play in references and citations at the end of scientific papers and research papers, because it just makes me chuckle. I still get asked to do these things from time to time, like review academic papers and stuff, and I've completely forgotten to do something, and that's going to bite me in the backside. So I'm thinking about that. I'm toying with the idea of looking at a PhD, and possibly only because Dr. Marczewski is a fantastic Bond villain name. I'm learning harmonica. It's just weird stuff at the moment, but I think season whatever is about getting back to why I started writing about gamification in the first place. And I think the reason I started talking about gamification way back when was because I genuinely felt and still feel that games are the key to unlocking the best in all of us. And I think that is as true now as it was the day I started writing. And if I was to write a book, it would be about that rather than about how to apply it for business. It would be how to unlock the best bits of your life, thinking the way games are designed to make you think, rather than how do you get more people to click the like button on your website with game mechanics. It's going to be more about, in my case, how do you manage depression and anxiety by looking at the world the way Mario looks at levels, that kind of thing. It's going to be, that's what I'm thinking about now. And I'm thinking more about, this sounds like a really odd statement, and I will justify it in a second. Legacy. And the reason I say that, somebody said to me, what is the proudest moment in your work? What are you most pleased about? And I thought about all the things I'd done over the last 20 odd years. And there's lots of things I'm very proud of, my previous roles, most recent roles, things that I've done that I'm incredibly proud of and really pleased about and bring me joy to think about the conclusion of. When I thought about contrite kind of things like, oh, my children and my family and all that. And I thought, you know what, actually, what it was, a couple of days ago, I get Google Scholar Awards because I'm an egotistical maniac in those respects, and I like to know when people are praising me. My God, I'm going to come across as such a in this podcast. So I got this alert not only a few days before this interview, and it was a paper about, I think it was the early detection of depression in adolescents. And they were talking about how gamification could be used for that. And my Hexab was being used as part of the research. And I have never felt prouder of a piece of work I've put out into the world than when I saw that, because that had the potential to impact people at a really important level. It wasn't about making people more money. It wasn't about getting people to do more of something. It was all about trying to help adolescents deal with something that was life-changing. And for me, that was kind of that moment of, do you know what? That's what, if I was to have an epitaph written of me tomorrow, I'd want it to be about that. That was what was important to me. And that, I think, is kind of part of where my head's at now, is how do I take all of this cool stuff that I've been so lucky to have done so many different things around gamification in the last 10 years, 11 years. How do I take all of that and use it for something useful? That's kind of where my head's at the moment. Whether I make it to that or not is totally up in the air, but that's kind of what that, I mean, it may just be I write Ninja Monkeys 2 and have done with it, but it's kind of that's kind of where my head's at, and why I wanted to, when I changed roles and I kind of stepped away from the industry in that respect, I could have quite happily have said, you know what, actually, this is a good opportunity just to say, right, I've done that now. I've reached pretty high up on that ladder of things around gamification. Let's do something different now and kind of move on. But actually, that one moment kind of made me go, no, do you know what? There's probably still more that I can do. I just need to do it in a different way now and come at it a slightly different way.
Interesting.
That was a long answer. Sorry, dude.
No. I actually enjoyed it very much. I was thinking, that's kind of personal gamification in a way, like applying it to yourself in different instances. And gameful. Again, I just had an episode.
Myself a goal.
Yeah. I in the recent episode I did a gamification 101 to get some people, into learning things. I just remembered like my mom and even my wife sometimes saying like every now and then they listen to the odd episode and they say like, I just didn't understand half of what you guys said. So this was kind of an episode dedicated to people who, unlike perhaps, I don't want to say my mom and my wife are not just explicitly uninterested in doing this, but people who are actually, intentionally thinking of, what's this about? I might be interested into this. I put it out there, but, enough promotion of the episode. One of the things I did was saying like, I don't want to get into the discussion of, whether this is gamification, gameful design, serious games, simulate, like, I explicitly am removing myself in that episode of that discussion. So when I said that, I said that like I was still in that mentality of, which way are we going in that sense? But I know that the discussion can be fruitful and very, very interesting. So
yeah, I think, you were involved in my first. So I always, whenever I want to try and get get some kind of community engagement, I redefine gamification. Because it just makes people start talking, and I start whinging about the Wikipedia page, and that gets a few people on board. And yeah, it's I don't think anyone's actually realised it's quite a deliberate. Let's just get people talking by doing something which I know most of my friends in the industry are fed up of hearing me say, or they'll join in because they want to get heard. And it's a really good way of getting people to talk. So I redefined it for myself because I got a very boring definition of it, and I kind of did that thing about. Same as you. I thought about it and I thought, you know what? I'm getting a little bit tired of having to explain to people the difference between games, gamification, and serious games and everything else. And although at an academic level, I really don't like mixing gamification into games and serious games. At a real level, you have to, because people just don't get the difference, and they're not interested in the difference when you talk to them about it. And so I started talking about the use of games and game-like experiences, that kind of stuff instead. And or I think I call it the process of making something into a game or game-like, to make it as simple as possible. And then about a week later, redefined it and said, if you really want to go for a really simple definition of gamification, it's about making things a bit less shit and a bit more fun. I apologise that you have to put explicit on this one now. But I just thought that was, and as jokey as it was, that is what I now use with people when they talk to me about it. I might taper the language somewhat depending on the audience, but that's how I define it now. It's making things less rubbish and a bit more fun, because at the end of the day, that's really the differentiator with gamification is if you can make something less difficult or less of a pain in the backside to do, it almost inherently becomes slightly more interesting, a bit more engaging, and maybe a bit more fun. If you then deliberately try and make it a bit more fun, then hopefully, if you get it right, you can make the experience good, or at least not terrible. And it's those little degrees, those little increments of change that I thought was really important to think about more. So, I went for this sort of really offensive definition, which I actually quite like and use more than my official definition now.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I enjoyed that discussion for sure. I have to say that. But as you were saying,
it's always fun.
No, for sure, absolutely. And the thing is, my sort of warning is that usually that discussion tends to engage people like us and alienate most of the other people who are either kind of setting a foot in there or have actually been doing things that they might call gamification or game-like whatever. And instead of sort of bringing them on board, it kind of alienates them a bit. But that's okay. Like we did in the Gamification Hub, and that's what the Gamification Hub is about. I'm talking about sort of when you talk or open up to a broader audience. Like I'm starting on Friday an advanced seminar with university students about gamification. If I sit down and spend 6 sessions with them, explaining to them all these differences, I'm sure I could spend, those, I think it's like 9 hours in total. I can invest them for sure discussing, what is gamification, what it's not, serious. I'm sure I could do that. Like, I don't think that's a problem. The question is whether they will be then more interested in doing something around these lines and whether it will be useful for their careers. And that's where it gets a bit more fuzzy for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's that. And also, I don't like telling people they're wrong. I mean, people might think I quite enjoy that, but I don't like telling people they're wrong because especially when I think it's really unfair to tell someone who talks about, is that like making games, that they're wrong because they're trying. And I'd much rather they were trying to engage in the conversation than going, I don't like games, which I've had. And I think from their perspective, if you turn, well, do you know what, actually, it's more about you, you've lost them straight away. The minute you yes, but somebody, you lose their interest because suddenly you're telling them, actually, no, you're wrong, you're an idiot. Don't think like that. And like I said, I'm not trying to go down. I'm not trying to sort of downplay anybody. I'm not trying to say that that they're right or wrong. Everyone approaches it differently. The key for me is let's be inclusive in the industry again, because it's changed a lot. I've seen the really open side of the industry and I've seen the really closed sides of the industry and the people in it. And I think there's a whole new generation of people in the industry I've never spoken to and who are doing amazing things, who are completely removed from the stuff that we were doing 10 years ago, because they kind of see what we were doing as being that niche of the old school gamification, the original stuff that was coming out, the Gabe Zickerman era of gamification. And I think we did it to ourselves, because we created these little closed groups of people talking to each other, and we created events where it was just the same group of people talking to the same group of people, and it became really cliquey. And that meant that it drove this kind of split of the industry a little bit, so that people went off and started doing it in ways that we considered wrong, and we'll be sitting there saying, no, that's not the way to do it. And they'll be doing great. They'll be doing absolutely fine. They wouldn't care what we thought. I mean, it's like I'm often not very interested in, when my grandfather was alive, it didn't really matter what he thought about modern TV, because it was irrelevant to me. That I like my cartoons, and he used to watch black and white westerns, and I watched Power Rangers. Well, I was too old for Power. I watched He-Man or something, And it's that same sort of mentality. It's that kind of, well, all right, Granddad, it doesn't really matter. You aren't the Bible on gamification, and I think there's a large group who fell into that. Lots of people left and went off and did other things. Some of us stuck around and tried to remain relevant, like those desperate Hollywood icons of yesteryear who keep trying to return. And I think it's more of a case of, if we want the industry to evolve in the way we all wanted it to originally, we all started with the right thought. We all started with this kind of pure thought of, games are amazing at engaging people and bringing joy and getting people doing stuff and engaging with stuff and doing repetitive tasks, but in a way that they enjoyed. And we had this utopian view of, we're going to transform the way everyone does everything. And the reality is very different. And I think it's taken a while for that to be the truth for a lot of us, myself included. I've never been one to believe that we were going to have people jumping for joy and being that PS1 advert where everyone's got their faces creased up in weird poses because they've just entered a row of data into Excel. That was never going to happen. But I actually think it was even worse than that worst case scenarios at times. Some of the stuff that came out turned people off to gamification so much. I still cringe whenever I see a newspaper article where they'll say something like so-called gamification, where points are given to people as rewards for doing mundane tasks and that kind of, which is kind of the standard definition that appears to come out in really big publications like the Times and things. Yeah. I die inside because we failed miserably at the time to get the right message out there. So it's kind of, how do we change that? Can we change that? Is it worth changing that? I don't know. They're open questions to the world. Is it worth trying to change that? Or do we admit defeat and just carry on as we are? Or do we find a middle ground of, yep, fine. Should we be punished for the sins of our childhood? We were young. We were in need of the money, reckless. Those pictures were never meant to be seen by everybody. I didn't mean to be seen at a classical music concert when I'm actually a heavy metal player. It's I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with this anymore. It's more of I think it's that sort of, the industry's changed. The world's changed. Yeah, the world's become much more serious than when we started 10 years ago. There was a lot more hope, I think. And I think one of the things I've found over the last few years, current events really, hitting home as well. But even before that, with the COVID lockdowns and everything else, the world has become more serious. And with that comes the realization that if we're talking to people about having fun, we have to be really mindful of their realities and what they're actually going through day to day. And I think when we started, that wasn't a big issue. I feel like 10 years ago, the world didn't feel as serious. And I think now that we've all gone through some fairly bad times, it's not been the great 3 years, 2 years, 3 years. redundancies are higher than ever and people changing jobs, people been ill, there's recessions, there's wars, there's all sorts of things happening. And do you want somebody turning up to your office dressed as a wizard saying, let's have some fun and learn how to do those spreadsheets? You've got to be a bit more tactful than that sometimes, I think. And is that something that we need to take on board a little bit more now as kind of gamification evolves? Or do we just say, no, sod it, let's all dress up like ninjas and run around playing games and telling people that's going to be how they're going to improve their lives at work? I don't know. It's not, there's no answer to that. It's just kind of I think we just have to be a bit more honest with ourselves about what it is we want to get out of this now in gamification.
What do we want to be when we're grown-ups, right? So
yeah, back to that again. When you grow up, you're 10 years old now. You can get away with it for a bit longer, but what do you want to be in a couple of years' time? Now they're out the hype cycle. Now that Gartner's forgotten about us and doesn't write books for no reason about us. What is it you actually want to be achieving with your name? Gamification. What do you want that to really be? I think that's where we are now.
That is a very good point too. I mean, time flies. Hopefully the listeners' time was flying as well as listening to the interview, but we've been at it for quite a bit, going into super interesting topics. Super interesting, hopefully.
Very dark, and I've talked a lot, and I don't think is it really an interview when the interviewee talks non-stop and barely takes breath? I don't know. It's just a really long lecture.
Hopefully I had somewhat of a side role, at least, in this movie of today. I was a sidekick of the movie for today, and I'm happy to be that sidekick in every single interview. I don't have a problem with that. Getting the best out of you guys.
That's what makes you so good at what you do as well. It's appreciated. Genuinely, it's appreciated in the industry what you do, because you're bringing people out that we might not have seen before as well. It's not just the same old faces, which is great.
Yeah. That's definitely a big attempt that I make at that, and it's the consequence, hopefully, of spending a few years having a weekly episode with hopefully a different person every now and then, having a repeat fantastic guest. It's part of the consequence of that, but. The question that you left there, I think, is a very neat one to sort of start wrapping up the interview of today, because I do feel that there was a lot of reflection that we went through throughout the whole episode. Some dark times, as you were saying, some lighter times as well. Hopefully, you agree with me, and I'm talking to the audience right now, that Andrzej is definitely not, a pain in the back in any way, as he was mentioning at some point in the episode. Definitely not. If you still think that, go to any conference, get to meet him, and you'll realize what a fantastically fun and enjoyable person to be.
I'm not totally miserable at all times. It's late and I'm tired. No. Absolutely. So if you're still not convinced, again, test it with reality. Everything that we say is a theory. Test it out, check it out, and see what that looks like. However, Andrzej, this has been a lot of fun. Hopefully we'll repeat in the future. Hopefully we'll get to see each other again in the future. One day.
This whole madness is finally going down. I don't know when that's going to be, but hopefully we get a chance to do that as well. Get to bring in some of the engagers as well at some point. But, at least for now and for today, Andrzej, engagers, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, engagers, thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast. And if you want more interviews like this one, this, different kind of interview, a bit more, sort of deep reflecting that we have with Andrzej, please go to professorgame.com/subscribe. And if you haven't already, go ahead and get started in our email list for free. That way you can provide us with feedback. You can say, what do you think about this? If you want more of it, if you want less of it, well, less is kind of hard. We don't do this very often, but if you just didn't like it and you don't want it anymore, I'd like to know all about this. So get over there, reply to any of the emails that we send. You'll be in direct contact with me. I read every single email, reply at least to most of them, if not all, when I can. And that way you can also be in contact. We will be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have specifically for you. And remember, before you go into your next mission, before you click continue, remember to subscribe or follow, whatever the wording is in your favorite podcast app. Do that. It's absolutely free. And listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.